wonderful there to see as people arrive how fashion, print culture and gardens can come together to show these different forms of representation, both about monarchic power but new forms of power too at the end of the 18th century. And I'm sure you have many ideas thinking about how these papers can link together in interesting ways. Would anyone like to ask a question and wait for the mic to come to you? Any questions? Mark, would you... Oh, sorry, is there someone up there? Thank you.
Mark, you were saying that clothing at the time was quite... I'm over here. Yeah. Sorry. Hi. You were clothing from that period, especially for women, was quite restrictive, and young girls wore it from a very young age, didn't they? So that would have affected their physical development. Did that cause many health problems later on in life and that kind of thing?
Just switch it on, I think.
Look, I've read different researchers writing different things on the point that you make, which is a very interesting one. I guess from the perspective of my particular paper, and I was talking about Madame, and there are so many instances in her many, many letters about the sort of impact of dress on her body and her experience that it just goes to show how important it is, I suppose I have to say to begin with. But also, she doesn't find it uncomfortable. She doesn't like to be uncorseted. She finds that uncomfortable. It's something that she has worn ever since she was a child, and she finds it accommodates her body and kind of her movement and action through the court. And she never complains of its kind of a physical effect on her body in that sense. But I mean, I suppose depending on individual bodies, then there could be consequences. And women wore, say, foundation garments when they were pregnant, for instance, which is probably not a sensible thing to do. I mean, I'm not an obstetrician and I don't know so much about that. But there could be consequences on their bodies. I mean, they tended not to live that long. Is it not the case? And I suppose certainly, I mean, Madame is only in her 60s when she dies, and she describes herself as an old woman, though I don't know that we would consider her to be an old woman at all now. And she does stop wearing court dress when she's very unwell, but only then. Only when she actually can't physically wear it, because it causes her pain because of other things that are happening in her body. For the rest of the time, she finds it perfectly comfortable. And she's not typical of women at court. The vast majority of women also wear a manteau, which is, I guess, like a kimono, and it's too difficult to explain. But it's a different form of garment that actually hangs from the shoulders so that it offers more support as a garment. And they wear it for comfort, but also because it's extremely fashionable. Not necessarily just because it's comfortable. I think that's something that we forget. And that, other kind of treatments of their body are in no way comfortable, like their hair. And so I don't know that comfort is as big an issue as we would think. I mean, certainly you don't find it as present in the letters as other things when it comes to people talking about dress and, even other people beyond Madame. So I guess it's not something that I really think about that much. It seems cruel, but just because it doesn't seem present, and I suppose in a way it's because it's something that these figures have been wearing their entire lives.
Your ideas.
I mean, they're curious in a way, so that the two I showed of Madame, which clearly are not meant to portray her physical appearance in any way, or particular dress. I mean, it's not as if it is a dress that is copied and turned into a print. They do a very similar thing, where that while they show kind of fashions in dress, I suppose, so particular kinds of decoration, or kind of lengths of certain things, or how things are fastened, they do various things, that they don't they don't catalogue all the features of that type of dress. They just show the kind of sort of interesting design elements that are of interest, say, for an audience like the Mercure Gallant, to know what's going on and what they can do to dress fashionably. So that they don't present a record in that real way. It's very similar to the sort of painting that I was talking about, where the actual kind of elements of the dress that we know are there, so the seams, the ways that they are fastened and the ways that they are put together, because these are sort of lots of individual components. It's not like it's a dress like we think of a dress now. That's not shown. Sometimes the lacings are shown because it's kind of part of the fashionable element and how their lace changes from kind of period to period. So it's really about sort of communicating the information that is of interest to the audience, kind of the particular kind of elements that are fashionable, not the kind of entire thing as kind of a series of parts that make up a whole habit.
So question for Mark as well. You mentioned briefly, men and women often wore high heels in this period, which I love. Just here. Hi. And of course, Louis XIV was well known for his red heels. Mm-hmm. And is it true? I mean, often it's said that if you were favoured in the court, you'd be allowed to wear a red heel as well. I mean, how did that sort of idea play out? Certainly, there are items of clothing that are gifted. Some of them you kind of inherit with the position that you hold. So, Madame is the wife of Louis XIV's only sibling, his brother. So that she is able to wear certain things. So her hunting habit is Orléans blue, and it has cuffs that are, I'm not used to having a microphone, cuffs that are folded back that have royal flame red, and that she can wear that because of who she is. It can't be taken away from her, and it can't be given to anybody that is not an Orléans or sort of like somebody that is kind of supported by them, like part of their retinue. When she hunts with a king, she may wear that. When she hunts with the Dauphin, she may wear his livery. I mean, it kind of depends. But she has the option of doing it because of her position. Otherwise, it has to be gifted. If it's not something that you are inherently able to wear. And that I think the brevet is probably the most known example, a kind of jacket that meant that you had the freedom to attend on the king in certain locations, that had to be given, and that you could inherit, but that you could also purchase, or that it could be given to you. So yeah, these things are sort of really important markers of social relationships that are obviously inherently visible, that can be seen and everybody understands the way that they work, which is why they're so incredibly important.
You have another question?
Hi, it's very loud. I'm Sally from La Trobe, and again a question for Mark and an answer to a question earlier about the corset. I recently saw a documentary about the hazards of the Victorian era, and one of them was the corset, and the very fact that they tied it so tight that they in fact reshaped their liver, and not in a positive way.
Foundation garments in the 17th... I have a stick if you need it, Robin. Foundation garments in the 17th century aren't like corsets in the Victorian period. So they're quite different, and they can be made up of several different things. They're not usually sort of as restrictive or not as tightly bound. Not having worn one myself, and I don't like to talk about things that I have no experience of, but they tend not to be as strict.
The other thing I thought was that when you said that they were comfortable in them, it's almost like Richard III when they dug up his bones and then they found a guy with the identical curve in his spine. They made him a personalised armour to see really how well he could have fought in armour with such bad scoliosis. And he said, the guy who was doing it said that it actually supported him perfectly.
Yes, I mean,
like a brace.
And
so I'm thinking that when they feel comfortable in their thing, it also gives them a sense of deportment.
Yeah, I mean, quite recently I was wearing a back brace. This is one thing that I actually know about.
And,
it was remarkable.
Books on your head
to everybody else, it looked like I was sitting upright, but I felt like I was slouching in it, like it was doing all of the support for me. But other than that, I don't know. I have a question for Lewis, if I can... Oh, sorry.
Well, I don't mind. If you want to carry on, I'd love to get a
Well, no, let's do it in order of seniority.
Sophie, my question is for Sophie.
Oh, okay. And then I saw it for a question too.
For Sophie.
Okay, she started with Mark.
Okay, so I'll make it super quick. I loved your. I love the fact the continuities you're trying to establish. There's quite a big counter tide to that the Fête Révolutionnaire is in fact something very different from the festivities do you think that you could extend your very subtle continuity argument into other parts of the festivity, so the music and the coordination and in other words, you've shown some visual continuities between a kind of late Ancien Régime fête and the Revolution. Could that have a wider? Do you find any of the music or the choreography to be similar?
Well, I think that David was same stable and Miku and the other working with the same sort of visual vocabulary and set of symbols.
Hold it close to your mouth, Sophie.
Okay. So working with the same sort of vocabulary of symbols, and not only was David, I think, employing recycling much of religious and court ceremony.
He went to see, by the way, Meeks in 1780. He was taken on a picnic by Sedan and Co. to see that very mountain and those very things. And there's a letter which says, "Wasn't it wonderful and delicious as a retreat?" And so that's pretty much certain.
Well, I've never seen. Have you actually seen it written down that was the direct inspiration? Because it seems obvious to me.
No, it wasn't. No, but I mean, I know he went to see it, but you're the one that's made the argument.
Yes, events would finish with fireworks. He would use the Ruggieri brothers to do the fireworks, which was the company that worked for Louis XV. And not only that, the people in prison were able to reproduce on their own festivals, which are uncannily similar in terms of sort of processions, objects moved across on sort of biers and catafalques. They could send up the rituals of court as well, and it could all be used to sort of make extraordinary political points, revolutionary and counter-revolutionary. And so the fact is that people could participate and initiate this stuff every bit as much ease as an architect or artist.
So, Florian?
Yeah, I have another question for Sophie about the chopping down of the trees. It's heartbreaking, of course, but was the idea to give the wood to the people? And if so, are there any documents how that was administered or received? Because it seems like they asked for bread and they got wood.
No, the wood was to be chopped up and sold for the court. The people on the estate were contracted, brought in to carry it away. But I see no suggestion that it was actually given.
Thank you for such a wonderful paper and really such extraordinary photographs of the prints. I believe it. But I'm so interested in the kind of the consequences of the commentary that you relayed on Laporte's career. So whether, in a way, it sort of promoted him for certain kinds of projects, where it limited him for others. I mean, obviously he's a great celebrated printmaker of 17th century France, but I just wonder how it affected him in his work.
You know, I'm not sure that it did at that particular moment, because
how's that? Good. What was the question? No. It's been a long day. So in the 1670s, I don't think it affects him. I think that I think it's Charles Lebrun who is I'm imagining sort of masterminding the production, not just of that publication, but some other projects from the Cabinet du Roi. And I think that Leporte is given the opportunity to do things that he hasn't been that he hasn't been challenged with before, like the incredible fête prints, which we always speak about in terms of the subject matter, but never really about the printmaking per se. There's something incredible going on there, and I only thought about this recently with this particular project. It's just shortly after he completes these works, and shortly after he dies, that people begin to, like Etienne Picard or agents of Etienne Picard, begin to question Leporte's methods, right? because as the language, as the critical language for printmaking is developing toward the end of the century, it's really the engravers who are sort of in the academy who set the terms, who set the framework of what constitutes good printmaking and what constitutes like useful printmaking. But Le Portrait is, but just to get, I don't want to get too far from Versailles, because I think it's the pressure of the events that happened at Versailles and the things that were being made at Versailles, and that pressure in combination with someone like Charles Lebrun, who understood printmaking. He made prints, he published prints, and Colbert, who wanted something that was as visually, that was as magnificent as the thing being represented. I think that's a very particular moment, the 1670s, because it's that moment that begins to define the golden age of printmaking in France, and that lasts, in a way, that lasts until the 19th century. And so it's the magnificence of Versailles translated onto paper. After Colbert dies, the prints, depending on which project we're looking at, they're not so great. Like the Le Portrait project, the fountain that you showed, that's a technical term for so
can I follow on with a sort of question for that, because I think actually it's very relevant to Versailles. I mean, I'm interested in prints as ambassadorial gifts. And why are they used as ambassadorial gifts? I mean, they're supposed to be showing something spectacular about France, aren't they? It's not just that, well, here's the stuff that we've got, but the material of the print itself, the making of it, the kind of superlative nature of the print is a form of representation in itself, right?
But the special moment for these is the 1670s. After Colbert goes, after Lebrun loses, control and power, then the prints tend to be more problematic. And then there's Van der Meulen, who
yes, of course.
has his battle prints reproduced, but he's the publisher.
Yes.
And then he sells a couple of plates
Yes.
to the Crown. So the Crown's not really making
Yes.
prints of that quality anymore.
Yes.
They're making a lot of prints of
Yes.
but they're not as interesting as prints as the ones that were made in the 16th.
So really it's that Cabinet du Roi project that we know starts in 1670, which is a very strategic project, a Colbert project. Yeah, absolutely. That's right. Questions?